In Latin America, people often spoke up. They voted for leaders who promised to change things. These leaders talked about fairness and being independent. They wanted to be in charge of their own country's important things.
But this idea of people having a say wasn't always welcome. Decisions made far away in Washington, D.C. often went against what these countries wanted. Leaders in the U.S. and big powerful companies saw this as a danger to the control they had for a long time and to the money they made.
The idea of real democracy in Latin America was a tricky thing. For the United States, it was okay sometimes, but only if it matched what America wanted. If a country chose a way that seemed too independent, people in the U.S. got worried.
This was a big deal, especially if it meant changes to how their money or businesses worked. Things like sharing land more fairly or the government taking control of big businesses were seen as very risky. These actions were a threat to the big businesses owned by U.S. companies.
The Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, became a tool to handle this. It was used as a way to try and control what these other countries did. Its job, often kept secret, was to make sure the U.S. kept its power.
Controlling their valuable things, their money systems, and their governments. When World War II ended, a new kind of fight began. This was the Cold War, where the U.S. and the Soviet Union were on opposite sides. America said it was protecting freedom for everyone in the world, like a bright light for freedom in a world that was split apart.
But underneath all that, a different kind of war was being fought. It was a secret war, fought quietly, away from the newspapers and TV. Latin America became a really important place for this secret fight. Because it was so close, it was super important for America's plans.
This secret fighting was done in many sneaky and harmful ways. It wasn't about big armies fighting each other out in the open. Instead, they used tricky ways that were hard to notice, so they could say, "It wasn't us." The CIA was really good at these sneaky ways of trying to control things.
They helped groups that were against the government, even if those groups didn't let people have a say. They put out special stories and messages that weren't always true to try and change what people thought. They tried to mess up a country's money and businesses from the inside.
The main idea was to make governments shaky and weak and then get rid of them if they didn't agree with what America wanted.
It was a time with lots of big, messy political changes and fighting. Planned takeovers by the army became a common thing back then.
In the early 1950s, Guatemala was full of hope. People called this time the 10 years of spring. Changes were happening, so people had more say in how the country was run. President Jacobo Árbenz Guzman was the one leading these changes.
People voted for him, and he wanted to make things better. Árbenz wanted to make Guatemala more up-to-date and make things fairer for everyone. The biggest change he wanted to make was about farmland. His plan, called Decree 900, was to give out land that wasn't being used.
A lot of this unused land was owned by just one company, the powerful U.S.-based United Fruit Company, or UFCO. UFCO was known by the local people as El Pulpo. That means the octopus. It was like an octopus because it had its hands in everything, Guatemala's money and how the country was run.
It controlled huge banana farms, train tracks, and the places where ships load and unload. Árbenz offered to pay UFCO for the land they weren't using, but UFCO said no. He offered to pay based on the low value UFCO had claimed for the land on their taxes.
But folks in Washington, D.C. looked at Árbenz's changes and thought about the Cold War. Some important people in the U.S. government were very connected to UFCO.
They made Árbenz sound like a dangerous communist, like he was just doing what the Soviet Union wanted. So the CIA was given the job to get him out of his role as president. Part 4. Chile, 1973. The crushing of Allende's socialist dream. Chile had a long history of people choosing their leaders by voting. In 1970, the people of Chile voted, and Salvador Allende became their president. He was a Marxist, and he led a big group of different political parties that many people supported. Allende promised to make big changes in how the country was run and how people lived. Part of his plan was for the government to take control of very important businesses, like the ones that mined copper. Copper was the most valuable thing Chile got from the earth, and it made a lot of money for the country.
Big American companies like Anaconda and Kennecott had a lot invested in Chile's copper. Allende also wanted to give workers more rights and have more programs to help people. When Allende won, it really surprised and worried the leaders in Washington. President Richard Nixon really wanted to stop him. Even before Allende started his job as president, Nixon gave orders. He told the head of the CIA, Richard Helms, to do things that would really hurt Chile's economy. The idea was to stop Allende from getting too strong or having too much control. Or if that didn't work, they wanted to create a situation where he could be kicked out of power.
So the CIA started a big plan to try and make things unstable in Chile. They gave money to political groups who were against Allende and to newspapers and radio stations that also opposed him. They used propaganda, spreading certain stories, to make people scared and unhappy with how things were going. The CIA also encouraged truckers and shop owners all over the country to go on strike and stop working. These strikes really hurt Chile's economy, and soon there weren't enough things like food for people.
Then, on September 11, 1973, the takeover of the government began. Chile's army, led by General Augusto Pinochet, made its move. They attacked La Moneda, the presidential palace where Allende worked in the city of Santiago.
Section 5. The Dominoes Fall, a pattern of dictatorships across the continent. The takeovers in Guatemala and Chile weren't just separate things. They became like dark plans for how the U.S. would step in. Across Latin America, a very sad pattern began during the Cold War. Governments chosen by the people or those wanting changes were targeted. If they had different ideas or questioned U.S. business deals, they risked being messed with and violently kicked out.
The reason they gave was almost always the same. They said it was a fight they'd have against communism. This strong talk against communism often hid other real reasons. Protecting money for U.S. companies was a big reason. Keeping political control in that part of the world was another reason. U.S. leaders often used the domino theory to explain why. They said if one country turned to communism, others would follow, like dominoes. This fear, real or overblown, pushed the U.S. to get involved.
Think about Brazil in 1964. It was a big, important country. President João Goulart was trying to make some fair, small changes. He was kicked out by an army takeover with U.S. help. This led to 20 years of harsh army rule. In Argentina, a 1976 army takeover removed Isabel Perón from power.
Section 6. Counting the cost. Scars of repression and unveiled truths. The human cost of these actions was terrible. Across Latin America, hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. People were killed, tortured, or just disappeared. Their families were left looking for answers that never came. People lived in fear under leaders who ruled with a heavy hand. Systems for fair government, built with great care, were destroyed. People couldn't speak freely, and anyone who disagreed with the leaders was stopped. The lively communities and groups that people had formed were torn apart.
The way countries made money was often changed to help out other countries instead of their own people. The leaders, helped by the U.S., forced new rules about money and business on the people. This often meant that some people got much richer while others got poorer, and many people became very unhappy and protested. The terrible experiences from these military takeovers and harsh leaders left deep, painful memories. These memories still hurt people and their communities in Latin America today. Whole generations of people grew up with leaders who made all the rules and didn't allow much freedom. The hurt in people's minds and hearts was huge and has lasted a very long time.
For many years, people didn't know exactly how much the US was involved in all of this. It was kept very secret, and the government said it wasn't doing these things. But slowly, the truth started to come out. Secret papers from the CIA, which were shared with everyone many years later, told a very scary and upsetting story.
Section 7. How past actions still have effects, from forced takeovers to computer ways today. Some people might say that open U.S. takeovers of governments don't happen anymore. Those really obvious army moves from the Cold War, they feel like a long time ago. But the wish to affect what happens in Latin America is still there. The ways of getting involved might have just changed. They've become sneakier and maybe more high-tech. But the deep-down reasons are often still very much alike. It's about protecting money and keeping world influence. Past actions still cast a big shadow on today's relationships.
Instead of giving guns to rebel groups, they use new methods now. Money penalties or sanctions can badly hurt a country's economy. They often say these only hurt certain people, but regular folks usually suffer. There's also money pressure and loan rules from big world groups. These can make governments choose things their own people don't like. So, The way these struggles happen has kind of changed. It's less about actual fighting, more about using computers and money. Instead of soldiers, it's now about computer programs and social media plans.
Fake news can spread super fast online these days. Outsiders can quietly change what people think and talk about in politics. Using laws and courts for political reasons, sometimes called lawfare, is another method.